Hello, I'm John Allure. Before you listen to this episode, a couple of things. These are podcasts from the first season of Who Killed Theresa. They haven't been heard in over 4 years. They're raw. It took me a while to develop a style. A lot of people like them that way, unvarnished. Others commented that it was amateurish. Nonetheless, here they are, unedited. I haven't gone back and listened to them. I haven't cleaned them up. Thanks for listening, and once again, life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart and dedicated like on television. This is Who Killed Theresa.
This is Who Killed Theresa, episode 17. The following is from the Montreal Gazette from January 1982. At 10:45 p.m. tonight, it will have been exactly 296 days since the brutal slaying of Tammy Leakey in Dorval's Industrial Park. The 12-year-old Verdun girl was one of 65 homicides in the Montreal urban community this year, and one of 51 cases still not solved. Her killer may well be reading this story. In this hour-by-hour, day-by-day account of the events of March 12th and its aftermath, Gazette police reporter Peggy Kieran tells how police handled Tammy's killing, how the neighborhood changed, and how the girl's still grieving relatives are fighting to cope with her senseless and tragic death. March 10th, 1981, early evening. A young woman is walking along a secluded Point St. Charles street when a man approaches and tries to pick her up. She tells him to leave her alone, but he grabs hold of her arm and attempts to force her into his car, a red compact. She manages to pull free and run away. She doesn't call police. March 12th, 1981, early evening. Betty O'Connor Leakey wants an evening out. 2 months after moving from the Point into a ground floor flat on Fifth Avenue in Verdun, she yearns to see the old neighborhood and catch up on all the latest news. With her 2 daughters in tow, Tammy, 12, and Donna, 5, the young divorcee sets off for an evening at the Ryde Street home of her friend Bonnie Tapp and Tapp's daughter, Cindy. March 12th, 1981, approximately 8:45 p.m. Tapp has offered to make coffee for her guests when she remembers there isn't any milk. She asks if Tammy would mind running out for some at the dépanneur Chez Bert, the nearest grocery store, little more than a block away at the corner of Liverpool and Coleraine streets. Tammy, a tall, quiet girl whose long brown hair sets off steel frame glasses, readily agrees, especially when Tapp suggests she purchase chocolate bars for herself and the other 2 children. 9:20 p.m. Tammy hasn't returned. Her mother is edgy, knowing the store is only a 2-minute walk away and isn't likely to be very busy on a rainy Thursday night. Starting to worry herself, Tapp offers to walk over to the store and bring Tammy home. But at Chez Bert, the owner says Tammy stayed only long enough to pay for the purchases. He says she left roughly 15 minutes earlier, around 9:05 p.m. 9:25 p.m. Tapp retraces her steps. 4 doors away from her home, she spots a brown paper bag near the curb. In front of 2340 Ryde, I saw a bag with the chocolate milk and chocolate bars lying in the gutter with her glasses, Tapp recalls the following morning. Tapp goes back to the house to get Tammy's mother. They decide to ask people on the street if they had noticed the girl or seen where she went. 9:34 p.m., they knock on the door of a ground floor apartment at 2340 Ride. Eva Renault, who suffers from diabetes and has difficulty moving around, often has a chair propped under the window so she can watch events on the narrow street. On this night, however, Renault has been sitting on the couch about 5 feet from the window with the television on. She tells the women what she noticed. Tapp says Renault told them she had seen a man in a beige trench coat get out of a small red car and force a young girl into it. She told me the girl screamed and yelled the whole time, but she didn't do anything, Tapp said. The two women return to Tapp's flat and call police. 9:35 p.m. A patrol car arrives to take the report. Police send out an alert for the missing girl, describing her features, her clothing, and where she was last seen. 10:45 p.m. G. Ewing Talt, a 73-year-old pensioner living on Lakeshore Road in Bay Durfee, is driving along Lindsay Street in Dorval's Industrial Park when he notices something in the field alongside the road. Although it looks like a bundle of colorful rags, he decides to stop his car. Walking toward it, he sees the rags are actually jeans and a jacket worn by a young girl. The clothes have been torn. The child, lying on her stomach with arms outstretched, appears to be unconscious. The body is still warm, but there is no pulse. Tate calls police. 10:50 p.m. A police ambulance takes the child to Lachine General Hospital, where an emergency ward doctor declares her dead on arrival. The case is handed over to Sergeant Detectives Maurice Chartrand and Roland Oumet of the Montreal Urban Community Homicide Squad, MUC. The detectives are told of the Point St. Charles kidnapping. Comparing the description of the missing child with the appearance of the dead girl, they tentatively identify the body as that of Tammy Leakey. Her mother is notified. March 13th, 2 a.m. Relatives contact Gordon Leakey, 30, at his Toronto home and tell him that his older daughter has been slain. Betty Leakey returns to her Verdun home, leaving Donna sleeping at Tapp's flat. 9 a.m. Tapp tells reporters what happened and wonders how to break the news to the girl's sister. We told her last night that Tammy was missing. When Donna awoke this morning, she asked if Tammy came back, but we didn't answer her. We didn't know how to. 10:30 a.m. Despite the ripped clothes, an autopsy on Tammy Leakey's body reveals no signs of sexual assault. Results indicate the child was stabbed once and strangled, most likely with a length of rope or electrical wire. 12:30 p.m. Robert Cote, director of Police Station 24, says men in his area will work hand in hand with homicide investigators to search for the girl's killer. But he says people will have to be patient as police carefully and perhaps slowly track down every possible lead. He denies radio reports that the killing is one of a long series of kidnap murders in the neighborhood. 1 p.m. William Neuheimer, principal of St. Gabriel's Elementary School, cautions the 450 pupils against walking alone, particularly at night, in the wake of Tammy's slaying. Throughout the day, parents begin warning their children to be careful where they go and who they talk to. March 15th, 7 p.m. An MUC police official says an appeal for information on the Leakey killing yields some good leads, and detectives expect to have someone in custody soon. He says detectives who spoke with Renaud are looking for clues to back up her story, and for any information on the small red car spotted in the district on Thursday. March 16th, 10 a.m. More than 200 mourners file into the St. Gabriel Roman Catholic Church to pay their last respects to the dead girl. At the emotion-charged Requiem Mass, grieving relatives and classmates from the Verdun High School sob as Reverend Murray McCrory ponders the child's brutal and puzzling end. Here was a young girl, Father McCrory says, who was just beginning to live, in a way, and she has been violently snatched away. Not one of us cannot be affected. 12:30 p.m. Close to tears, Eva Renaud calls the Gazette. She says strangers have been making threatening phone calls and neighbors are blaming her for the kidnapping, although she saw very little and had no way of knowing it wasn't perfectly innocent. I saw a man's arm in a beige coat and a smaller arm like that of a girl in a blue coat. The man's arm pulled at the girl's, and I didn't see much more than that, and I couldn't move quickly enough to get a good look. I saw a small red car parked outside, and I heard someone yell. But until Tammy's mother and friend came round, I didn't think it was anything serious. 1 p.m. Police say they are inching closer with the help of two witnesses who have described a man driving a red car, possibly a hatchback, with a rear windshield wiper. An MUC police official says Renaud's testimony was confirmed when a young woman called the homicide squad over the weekend to say she had been approached by a man in a small red car the previous week but was able to escape. March 17th. The Sun Youth Organization offers safety tips to families of school children to make them more aware of the dangers of talking to strangers. March 18th. Tammy's relatives thank friends and strangers who helped them through the tough ordeal and promised to act to prevent the same thing from happening again. Pearl Leakey, Tammy's 54-year-old grandmother, begins circulating a petition demanding bus service for area children who attend St. Gabriel's School. She says she wants to see a block parents program introduced to give children a safe place to turn, and she promises to lobby for more police foot patrols in Pointe Saint-Charles, Verdun, and Little Burgundy. Police say they continue to receive leads but have no new information to disclose on the case. March 19th. Bob White, director of the West End Sports Association in adjacent Little Burgundy, says Montrealers like Tammy Leakey will continue to be killed as long as the city of Montreal fails to provide adequate sports and recreational facilities for inner-city children. Station 24 director Cote says his men are actively working in the neighborhood alongside 8 homicide detectives probing the case. April 7th. Cote says there is a good chance the Leakey murder will be solved. 3 officers are assigned to foot patrols in the district. But Cote warns local residents against blowing an isolated case out of proportion. April 8th, 8 p.m. Pointe Saint-Charles parents propose that gentle vigilante groups patrol the neighborhood since MUC police appear uninterested in the rising crime rate in the area. More than 70 residents attending an evening meeting suggest that 50 parents be selected to watch over the area. The parents, who would wear special identification badges, would be expected to accompany children and senior citizens to and from their homes at night. April 15th, 8 p.m. Point residents say they're giving MUC officials a week to reply to their demands for increased police protection in the wake of Tammy Leakey's slaying. They say they will meet with officers in a week. If that doesn't work, they say they will devise more aggressive strategies to help get what they want. But Cote, who addresses the 60 residents in attendance, says some of their demands are impractical. He says police protection is adequate and a separate police station is unnecessary since people summon help by telephone. Although police are not ready to lay charges, Cote says there is a very good chance of the case being solved because of the abundance of leads supplied to police. December 1981. The Leakey family prepares for Christmas, the first since Tammy's death. They have no more information on how or why she died, and sometimes wonder whether police are still looking for her killer. It's difficult at this time of year now, with one missing, says Pearl Leakey. Somehow we have to go on. She says she's sure police have done their best and doesn't like to point a finger, but still finds it hard to understand why police can't nab the man who nabbed her granddaughter. You wonder sometimes, when a policeman gets killed and they arrest someone the next day, maybe at another time, if we hadn't been in this situation, it would never cross your mind. But it seems like they had so much evidence. Homicide detectives say they can't spare the time to discuss this or any other case currently under investigation. They, the homicide detectives, aren't talking, says MUC police spokesman Constable Norman Couillard. They are too busy trying to solve this year's cases. Cote, whose duties now include administering both stations 24 and 25, says the Leakey death was the most tragic and most publicized in his district this year. And his men have never let up in their search for the girl's killer. No case is ever closed. There is no statute of limitations for murder, says Cote, a 44-year-old cop who dismantled dozens of bombs as a member of Montreal's bomb squad in the 1960s and 70s. He said police still receive calls about the case on a regular basis, and patrolmen check every lead, no matter how far-fetched it may sound. The break will come when a patrolman overhears something in a bar or meets someone on the street. Someone who slips a bit of information, the final piece that ties the whole thing together. The Gazette article ends with reference to another article in this edition. The headline is "Murders Double, but Solution Rate Drops," page 16 and 17. But I don't have copies of those articles. But nevertheless, everything in that piece by now, we're into episode 17 of Who Killed Theresa, should appear very familiar to anyone listening. And the degree that this is a criminal and investigative failure is monumental. That the Gazette would give this a full 2-page spread coverage, on the one hand, is somewhat surprising, but then again, not very, given that this was a child murder. Although you could certainly make the case that so was Sharron Prior, and again, 2 Anglophone victims, Prior and Tammy Leakey. Yet I don't recall much press on Prior in the English language papers, although I wouldn't have collected it to the degree that the Prior family did. But certainly Prior was heavily covered in the French press. There was one article on Tammy Leakey in the French press, and then, of course, quite a lot of English attention in the papers. Some things to note about this. First, I would say something that the article gets wrong is that, contrary to the account, Leakey was not found in a field alongside the road on Lindsay Street. She was found in the curb of Lindsay Street. And we know this because I did an access to information request on the Leakey file, got the autopsy report, and tucked in with it was a crime scene map that very clearly indicated the body right next to the curb, the sidewalk on Lindsay Street. Where is Lindsay Street? Well, we say the Dorval industrial area. What does that mean? If anyone knows Montreal, she was found over where the Montreal airport is. That's where she was found, that industrial zone. There have been attempts over the years to link this to the Sharron Prior case, mostly because of the locations. Both girls disappeared in similar fashion in what appears to be snatch and grab situations, within 2 or 3 blocks of each other, depending on which route you take. And so about 2 minutes away from each other. I've walked it. It's very, very adjacent. Of course, what makes a connection difficult is perhaps the separation in time. We're talking about a 6-year difference, 75 for Sharron Prior, from Pointe Saint Charles, 1981 for Tammy Leakey from Pointe Saint Charles. Both young women, physically similar in stature. Tammy Leakey, 12 years old, 4 foot 10 inches, 86 pounds. Sharron Prior, 15 years old, 5 foot 3, 103 pounds. But there hasn't been a lot of traction in certainly putting these two cases together, and I am skeptical myself. I'm not, frankly, quite sure what the puzzle is here. Just because they happened in similar locations. Keep in mind that Pointe Saint Charles was a very rough part of town. We've talked about this before. A lot of the Irish poor immigrants lived in that area. A lot of violence going on there. We've mentioned this before. If you want to get a flavor of the Pointe Saint Charles character, there's a National Film Board of Canada film called The Point that is quite good. Give you an idea of what it was like living in that area in the 70s. Note that the cause of death, the official cause of death from the coroner, André Lazon, was strangulation. Note the physical characterization. She was found in her clothes, like a jean jacket and jeans. The coroner's report says that they did take the clothing to test it for signs of, for a chemical analysis to see if there was DNA, and they specifically reference spermazoa, although we don't know what the conclusion of those tests were, or even if they, again, as this has been brought up so many times, if they still have the DNA evidence in the Montreal Police Archives. I will note that one of Leakey's shoes was missing. On the one hand, don't want to emphasize that point. It could very well be that in a scuffle a shoe gets lost. However, we've seen a lot of victims with missing shoes in these cases, and as one reader, a listener has suggested, is this a trophy? Did the assailant have a shoe fetish? It's certainly something to be considered. I will note the compression of time from the moment of her disappearance to the moment when she was found. So the last sighting of her is by the the woman with diabetes at 9:05 p.m., and she's found at 10:45 p.m. Now, the drive from Pointe Saint-Charles to the Dorval Industrial Park, I'd put it at about 20 minutes. So whatever occurred in just a little over an hour. Not uncommon, but certainly something to note in terms of a timeline. Now, the Leakey case for me is a bit of an outlier. I really don't know, as I said earlier, where to place it in terms of the events we've already talked about, or even if it's related. I will note that this is the last case that I cover. In fact, I've called it a coda in some writings, and it just seemed to be the event that not to give the impression that crime stopped. It certainly didn't. But 1981, it seemed to be transitioning to a new era in Quebec. The violent 70s had ended. And Christian Gravner in his blog Coolopolis talks about this a lot. How the social fabric of Quebec and Montreal appeared to change at that time. There was less violence, less poverty. Certainly, the French were less seen to be being oppressed by the English class after the French took power. A lot of the French in the areas became the professional class. Doctors, lawyers, civil servants, etc. Things seemed to settle down, but then a decade later, the late 80s into the 90s, we have the rise of the sort of a corporate feel to biker organizations, much more organized, much more sophisticated, and in the type of crime that they perpetrated in Quebec. And so we move into that era. There is another theory that has been put forward about Tammy by the Quebec documentary filmmaker Stéphane Perron. He has a film called Novembre 1984 that we've talked about before, November 1984. And he suggests that rather than Leakey being the ending to something, Leakey is the beginning to something. There's the whole series of child abduction and murders that occurred after Leakey, of both boys and girls, and I think he links 7 or 8 cases from 1981 to 84. 84 being kind of the apex, the most violent period there, and suggests that a serial murderer was responsible for that cluster of crimes. And there's even some suggestion that goes all the way up into the 90s with the abduction and murder of Cédrica Provencher, although I personally find that a little far-fetched, but nevertheless there are some who hold that belief. So the possibility of the Leakey and Sharron Prior homicides as being related homicides remains murky, and nevertheless is less interesting to me than something I would like to put on the table with this episode. I am more interested in talking about Leakey in reference to Prior for events that were preposterously similar and curious that happened at both young women's dump site. In the case of Sharron Prior, exactly 2 years in one day from the day that Sharon's body is found in the woods along Chemin de Lac in Longueuil, the body of another young woman is also found in the woods en Chemin de Lac in Longueuil. It's the body of a woman. She's unidentified at the time that she's found. She's thought to be between the ages of 18 and 25. And she's found wrapped in a green and white blanket. April 2nd, 1977. And the cause of death at that time is undetermined. Now, in the one article that I found on this case, there is absolutely no mention of the Sharron Prior case. There is no curiosity that potentially two victims turning up in the same spot within 2 years of each other, and given the fact that at this time the Prior case was unsolved and remains unsolved, there was absolutely no mention of this fact whatsoever to possibly jog the memory of the public. Similarly, in the case of Tammy Leakey, exactly 2 years prior to Leakey's body being found in that Dorval Industrial Park in 1981, the body of a young woman is found in that industrial park in late May of 1979. So a little over 2 years earlier. And no mention is ever given in the media written about Tammy Leakey that a body had been found there. And as you would assume that it was still an unsolved homicide. And this body is found within a mile of the Leakey site, in a dumpster, in a wooden chest. Now, I've had this information up on my website for over a year now, hoping that it would jog someone's memory, hoping that someone would be curious about this, assuming the police already knew about it. Although what I've learned of the police in my 16 to 17 years of experience in these matters, and what I've learned of the police in the last year, indicates to me that I should never have faith in a police agency, because my personal opinion, though I can never prove it, is that they are absolutely clueless to this stuff. Despite the fact that I handed it to them on a platter and urged them on several occasions to please look at it. Despite their big talk about wanting to cooperate across agencies, if a case isn't in their jurisdiction, they really don't give a crap about it. So the Sûreté de Quebec is not going to go sniffing in a MUC Montreal case or vice versa, let alone Longueuil. And in everything we were talking about here, we're talking about cases specifically between Montreal and Longueuil, not the SQ, but I certainly gave all of this information to the SQ. And I can tell you that I'm pretty confident that because Sharron Prior and Leakey is not on their docket, they're not interested, despite the fact that it might inform some of their other cold cases. But there it is. So this has, what I'm about to reveal is, I guess it's a podcast exclusive. In the year that this has passed, hoping some bright investigative journalist would dig something up and that I wouldn't have to do the work myself, we've identified one of these unidentified victims, and we are fairly certain we know who the other is. And I say we, I have some industrious colleagues who helped me dig up this information. So we'll start with the Chemin de Lac victim. A colleague managed to find the coroner's report on this victim. And what it tells us is that there was sperm in the vagina of the victim, so some form of sexual assault and most likely rape, and that the coroner curiously, they couldn't identify the cause of death, but the coroner finally ruled that it was a homicide. And they said, we don't have specifics about how it's a homicide, but because the body is in this is bizarre to me, because the body is in such an advanced state of putrefaction and needs to be buried quickly, we'll dispose of it and just call it a day and say it's a homicide. And the documents indicate that early on, they believed that the victim was a woman named Johanne Lemieux, and that they were taking steps to contact friends of Johanne Lemieux and to determine a positive identification. Now, we don't know anything more than that. We don't know if that determination was made. It's sort of left up in the air. But the unidentified victim that was found on Chemin du Lac 2 years after the death of Sharron Prior is possibly a young woman named Johanne Lemieux, who was sexually assaulted and murdered dumped at the same location. That's the information we know. In the case of the unidentified victim found near the Tammy Leakey site, another colleague who will remain nameless found a newspaper article. And the victim was identified as Maria Dolores Bravo. Now, Bravo was last seen on May 18th, 1979. She was leaving her home on 21st Avenue in the Saint Michel area of Montreal, which is the east end of Montreal. And she was on her way to a West Island disco, which, if you know Montreal, if you're going from the East End to the West Island, you have to pass through that industrial area where the body was found. She's found on just off Côte de Liesse in the Dorval Industrial Park. And the article mentions that she had a stage name in the clubs of Lolita, and she was 17 years of age. So a young woman. So we don't know how Maria Dolores Bravo died. The newspaper article simply says that the cause of death is undetermined and that there will be follow-ups on it. And then we hear nothing. Curious about this, similar to the Sharron Prior case, if you look at the Leakey articles, there's absolutely no mention of a victim named Maria Dolores Bravo. And there's a lot of media coverage. As we said, the Gazette devotes a 2-page spread that clocks hour for hour and day for day what happened within the year of Tammy's body being found. And yet we hear nothing about the fact that a young woman, a 17-year-old woman named Maria Dolores Bravo, was found in the exact same industrial park less than a mile from where Tammy Leakey's body was found. Though we may not know how Bravo died, I can tell you this. If you were a 17-year-old woman with the stage name Lolita on your way to a disco club in Montreal and wound up in a wooden crate or box in a dumpster, you met with an unfortunate outcome. And the last thing I think that is worth noting is where Maria Dolores Bravo lived. She lived in the Saint Michel area of Montreal on 21st Avenue. I've already said the East End, but more specifically, yes, that is the same area where Denise Bazinet lived, Lison Blais lived, and Jocelyn Houle was staying at that boarding house. It's the same East End area as all three. And it is, I think, worth noting that we know one other victim was coming home from a night at a disco, Liaison Blay, and wound up strangled and murdered. Where to go now with this information? I'm not quite sure. It's still pretty fresh, and there still needs to be some more digging in both of these cases to get to the bottom, and perhaps to fill out the gaps in information. This is always the point where I hope some bright investigative reporter wants to cut their teeth will come forward and sort of take the load from here. But it never really happens. All I ever get is people reporting on the work that I'm doing, which is less than satisfactory. I guess investigative journalism has disappeared. I still have some channels and some resources I can use to try and find out some information. Of course, none of those would involve either the Longueuil or Montreal police forces. They're closed boxes, and my faith in them has all but diminished. However, there are some other angles that possibly can be tapped. So I'm going to leave that now. I know that's not a lot to go on, but I did want to get the information out there. Perhaps there's a listener who knows something, or for whom those names are familiar and can contribute something. I'm not too optimistic after plus 40 years, but hell, you never know. And as I always sort of say, we're in the ninth inning making Hail Mary passes here, because what's left to us after so much time is just desperation moves. Just some housekeeping things. This has been episode 17 of Who Killed Theresa. As always, I'll put some photographic materials up on the Theresa Allure website, which is www.theresaallure.com. That's TheresaAllore. Some documents if you want to get visuals on anything we've been talking about today. I am on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @JusticeGuy. That's @JUSTUSGUY. There's also a YouTube channel for anybody who wants to see film footage of some of these cases. It's been documented in, I guess, Radio Canada, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, CTV Television, a lot of Canadian exposure. So if you want to see some media footage, just Google Theresa Allure or search on YouTube. You can find it there. The last thing I will mention is that it did not go without notice that yesterday was April 13th. So April 13th, the 38th anniversary of the date that my sister's body was found in Compton. It does happen occasionally that date will go by unnoticed by me, and I'm grateful whenever that happens. Although yesterday, for a variety of reasons, April 13th was I was acutely aware of the anniversary. So I think that's everything for this week. You never knew. Thanks for listening to this podcast, and have yourself a great afternoon.